I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And in the previous message, I gave kind of an overview of what 1 Corinthians chapter 8 is about. Paul is responding to a question that he was asked. What do we do about food that has been offered to idols? And his response to the question is that the food being offered to idols isn't really the issue. You may want it to be the issue, perhaps. Some of you may want it to be the issue, but it really isn't the issue. The issue is something else. It has to do with how are you being loving towards others. That really becomes the issue. And then we can answer the question of how do we deal with food offered to idols in the light of how are we being loving to others. Now, how we are being loving to others is going to be related to how we are loving God. But how we are loving God is also going to be related to in what ways are we being loved by God. All right? To what degree does God love us? So how we love him is a reflection of how he loves us, and how we love others will also be a reflection of how he loves us. In verse 3, he speaks about loving God. A little bit of a review from what I presented in the previous message. But if anyone loves God, this one is known by him. Okay, to be loving God, or for those who love God, it's because they love him. And for those who are known by him, it is because they know him. All right, so it starts with us knowing him, and it starts with us being loved by God, and then a consequence of us knowing him and being loved by him. A consequence of that will be that we love him and he knows us. All right, so we don't start with loving God and then maybe everything will work out from there. And we don't start with, does God know us? I mean, we do in a small way, but it builds up over time afterwards. Okay, so Paul says really that these are the primary issues. So with that foundation, I'm going to go ahead and proceed into verse 4. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 4, where he says, "Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols." He started in verse 1 with, "Now concerning things offered to idols." There's a little bit of a pause to say, but this is the real important issue. And then in verse 4 again, "Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols." It's like a restart. "We know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one." All right, we know this. We know that this idol really is just nothing. Okay, and we know that there is only one God. And so if somebody wants to assert that an idol is something, and that there is another God, then it's just all pretend. It's not real. It's fake. Okay, when somebody has an idol and they assert this is something of significance, it's just pretend. They're just pretending. Or if they suggest, or if some other spirit suggests that they are a god, well, they really aren't. They're just pretending to be so. It's just all fake. All right, that's verse 4. Again, "Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing." All right, we know that in the world, and that there is no other God but one. Now, just that knowledge in and of itself can be hazardous, because what about those people who believe that there is another God? What about those people who believe that the idol is something and that it's nothing. All right, we may use that truth in a way to offend them or to provoke them. We would like them to believe and to the truth that there is no other God and that this idol is nothing. We would like them to believe the truth. But to do that effectively, we may need to have some patience with this person and not just assert our truth, our knowledge upon them, but to have some degree of patience and look for a way to encourage them to move in that direction in a way that they can handle, that they can absorb. This is an expression of love towards someone else. And so the knowledge just in and of itself is meaningless unless you can also have knowledge that can be applied in a productive way, in a useful way that can move a person into the direction of eventually embracing the truth that the idol is nothing and that there really is only one God. If you do it in a provocative way, then they're not ready for it. They're not prepared for that. They don't have the right foundation to work from in order to really embrace that. Then you're going to cause a disruption in their life and in their beliefs in a way that it may not allow them to have a genuine connection with the God who you know. They may not be able to make it that far. Continuing in verse 5, for even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, in a certain abstraction, but not like the one true and living God. But even if there were such things, in verse 6, yet for us there is one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. This is the truth. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge. For some with consciousness of the idol until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. It will be defiled if we try to violate that. Okay, so we know, verse 5 and verse 6, we know that, what the truth is. We understand that. But in verse 7, however, there are people who we are going to interact with. Hopefully we will interact with them because it's the lost people who need to be saved. Do try to remember that. And that without us reaching out to them, there's less of a likelihood that they will be saved. But to them, their conscience and their faith, their belief is weak in comparison. All right, so what happens if they violate their beliefs? If they believe that the idol is of significance, and if they believe that the food being offered to idol is of significance, if this is violated in some way, then they're going to feel as though they are disconnected from the God that they believe is a real God. They are not being loved by the true and living God. Now you can consider this for those who are believers and they have weak faith. All right, if a believer has weak faith in the sense that they believe things that just simply are not true, if you try to cause a disruption in that belief without some sensitivity to what the consequences may be, then they may believe that you are encouraging them to violate God, in which case God will be ashamed of them. God will not love them. This is going to cause a disruption that's not going to be helpful. A person grows closer to their God by growing in their understanding of the love of God. And sometimes, or most of the time, they have to embrace that first before they are able to let go of those things they believe that are not true. First, a person needs to embrace those things that are true, and then after that, they can usually let go of those things they believe that are not true. And you can be a participant in that, or you can be a disruption to that. And this is an individual situation that you have to address as you are presented with it. All right, so let me go back up to verse 5 again. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father of whom are all things, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. However, there is not in everyone that knowledge, for some with consciousness of the idol, until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their consciousness, being weak, is defiled. But food does not commend us to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. All right? Verse 8. This has nothing to do with our relationship with God. It just doesn't. It hasn't. So with regards to things offered to idols, it has nothing to do with our relationship with God. Verse 8. Okay, but there will be believers who will believe that it does have something to do with our relationship with God. But if they are not properly prepared for making that transition, then when they eat of the food that they believe is going to have something to do with their relationship with God, then they are going to believe that they are rejected by God, that they have sinned against God, and this is going to cause a disruption in their lives. All right, now I understand that there can be times when we can encourage people to really believe what they really believe. That's fine, because eventually they'll come to realize that it's not working out for them. But this is different. This is the idea of provoking them into feeling that they have violated God. That's something else. And this is not loving. What can be loving is to say, yes, if you believe that eating food offered to idols is going to be a sin against God, you believe that. You go right ahead. But don't then just follow it up with, oh, but watch this. I'm going to eat this right in front of you. And you can do it too. Look, let's do it together. And then when they do that, then they're going to feel, oh, man, I've really sinned against God, and this is awful, and I'm now rejected by God, and he doesn't love me. That's what he says is wrong. Don't move in that direction. All right? So it can be loving to encourage people to believe, but it's not necessarily loving to encourage people to believe something else until they are prepared and ready to embrace it. All right, continuing into verse 9. But beware lest somehow this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to those who are weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. Now, will he really perish? Of course not. But he will believe that he has sinned. Okay, he will believe that he has violated Christ. And in that way, he will believe that he has perished. Okay, and that is important. All right, to separate from that, to come out of that requires it to be addressed in a different way, not just provocation and temptation, which is what he was speaking with them about, encouraging them not to use their freedom in a way that would be considered to be inappropriate. Okay, the person's shame that they will have will disconnect them from the small amount of love that they believe that they have from God. And the idea here is to increase the amount of love that they have from God. Don't disconnect them from whatever little amount that they may be able to hang on to. All right, let's go back to verse 10. Again, in verse 10, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge of eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? If you want people to be emboldened to eat things offered to idols, it has to be done in a different order. All right, not in the order of they see you and your freedom, and then they're tempted to enter into that freedom. Okay, that's the wrong order of things. First, they need to understand and embrace the truth that they are not going to be sinning against God because they eat some food. All right, they're not going to be sinning against God. That's the right order. The correct order is for them to discover the freedom that they have and then eat food as they desire, knowing that they are not violating God, instead of tempting them to do so and then they are violated God, and then you're trying to deal with the fact that they have not violated God. That's the wrong order of things. Okay? All right. Verse 11, and because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? Again, they are believing that they have sinned and they are rejected. They are rejected by God. So they do have weak faith. But this is not your problem to solve. All right? The fact that they have weak faith, this is not your problem to solve in this way of provocation, of trying to provoke them, of trying to tempt them into coming out of their weak faith. All right, it is not your their weak faith is not your problem to solve. That is something that has to be done between them and the Lord. So their weak faith is not the problem. You can encourage them to increase in their faith, but this is not going to happen this way. All right, what's going on here? What's going on is that they believe that their relationship with God has something to do with what they're eating and what they're not eating. All right, they may believe that their relationship has something to do with that. That, of course, is not true according to verse 8, where he says, but food does not commend us to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, nor if we do not eat are we the worse. It has nothing to do with anything. But they believe that it does. Okay, how will a person be set free from believing that it does? Okay? Most likely, it will come through their discovery that God does not relate to us on the basis of the law. Okay, when they discover that God does not relate to us on the basis of the law, he relates to us on the basis of the inheritance through the new covenant, then they can begin to move forward in that. Now, how is it that a person understands that they are not in a relationship with God according to the law? That's through forgiveness. Okay, so these are the transitions. It's just an example. They need to understand the forgiveness of God. Don't deal with the subject of the food. That's not really the issue. That has nothing to do with anything. Deal with the issue of, do you understand that you have forgiveness? And you'll probably discover that they don't believe that the sin issue is over between them and God, as is illustrated here. They probably do not believe in the complete forgiveness of sins. There are obstacles in the way. They're concerned about the consequences of believing that. They may enjoy the relationship that they believe that they have with regards to their ability to ask for forgiveness and get right with God and do whatever ceremony or sacrifice or sacrament that they may engage in. They may just really like doing those routines. That it's just something that they enjoy doing. It makes them feel good to ask for forgiveness. They don't want to give that good feeling up. All right, they don't want to give up these activities that they're involved in. Those Those are the kinds of issues that they're really dealing with. You want to deal with the food stuff? Deal with that first. And then through that, they'll realize that it was forgiveness that set them free from living a life according to the law. And from there, they can begin to revisit. Well, what are the laws that I seem to live by, that I believe is what makes me right with God? In what way am I obedient to God? And I believe that that's what sustains my right standing with Him instead of His forgiveness. What are some, and this is one of the laws that will come up. And if they really get into it, they'll realize that this was never a law to begin with. This was never even a law that was brought up. The closest that we can come to is maybe the dietary laws I spoke about in the previous message, that not even those dietary laws had anything to do with our personal relationship with God and whether we are right with Him or not. Even. So it's then that they have the foundation that they can work from in order to have an increase in faith. And what is this increase in faith? It is an increase in trusting in what God has done for them. It is an increase in trusting and believing in what God has given to them. And then they respond to the truth of forgiveness. They respond to the truth of being set free from the law. Their faith is their response to the truth that has been revealed to them. You want an increase in faith? You need an increase in their response to the truth that has been revealed to them. So they go from weak faith with no response to the truth to an increase in faith, to stronger faith, greater faith, through a greater response to the truth. But they got to know what the truth is. And this is not going to happen by you saying, okay, let's just go eat some food offered to idols, and maybe then you're going to be provoked, you're going to be confronted, and oh gosh, there's this terrible sin, and now I'm going to try to convince you that you haven't sinned against God. And boy, you got a long ways to go to convince them of that. And this is not going to be helpful. All right? So you deal with these things in different ways. So again, going back to verse 10, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, what does this mean? You have knowledge. And if they catch you, if they see you eating in an idol's temple or wherever else, okay, then your knowledge is nothing because you have not incorporated the love of God for you and your love for others into this knowledge. This is a reflection from verse 1. Okay, and verse 2, verse 1, where he says, now concerning things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. Knowledge without love is an opportunity for religious pride. And if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing. So then going back to verse 11, and because of your knowledge, right? Oh, I'm sorry, verse 10. And if anyone sees you who have knowledge, from verse 2, and if anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing, yet as he ought to know. All right? Verse 10, you have knowledge, but you know nothing about what you ought to know, because look at what you're doing. You're offending your brother through doing that. And your love of your brother is important. All right? And then continuing in verse 10, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? Will they then be tempted to do so? And you may think that that's how you solve the problem, but it just isn't. You have to address the core issues, the lack of faith. The lack of faith in what? The lack of an understanding of the truth of what? Not the truth of eating the food or not, but the truth of forgiveness, freedom from the law, the love of God. Those things, those are the things that a person needs built up, increased. Verse 11, and because of your knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. They will believe that they have perished, and they may very well feel so condemned that they walk away from the faith. Instead of walking towards the Lord, they can walk further from Him. And how are you going to get them to return? if you haven't dealt with these other issues previously, they're not ready. They're not ready. Verse 12, but when you thus sin against the brethren, that's what you're doing. You are sinning against them because you're provoking them in a way that gets them outside of the proper order of the development of faith. All right, the way that faith is increased is different from just, trying to tempt people into what they believe is sin. That's not the right way to increase a person's faith. Therefore, you are sinning against them, okay, not as if there is a specific law, but this is an unloving act towards them. All right, it is an unloving act towards them to tempt them into something that they believe is sin. It is not an unloving act to participate in their lives in a way that you can increase their faith from being weak to strong. That is loving. It's just that this is not going to be the way. This is not the way to make that happen. Again from verse 12, but when you thus sin against the brethren and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ, because it is a violation against his objectives, his purposes. You're violating God because you are tearing a person further away from him. Look, I understand that this person is not very close to him. I understand. It's obvious. Their faith is weak. Fine. But it does not mean that you are to take them further away from him, thinking that that's what's going to draw them closer to him. No, you're causing a disruption to take them further away from Christ by getting them to believe that they have sinned and now they're disconnected from the love of God. And how are they going to get right with God? And this is always going to be remembered throughout all eternity that they ate this food. That's taking them further away from the love of God. Therefore, you are sinning against Christ in the sense that you are violating his purposes, his objectives. Therefore, verse 13, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Well, at least in front of them or to their knowledge. Don't boast about what you have done in the presence of somebody who believes that is sin. Okay, don't encourage that. Don't boast that. Just don't do that. Remember that you are loving others that they may know the love of God more. That your knowledge in and of itself, just by itself, is not going to be effective. That there also has to be this connection with the love of God and how you relate to others. So he's going to use his freedom. He has the freedom to eat whatever he wants, whenever he wants, wherever he wants. But he's going to use his freedom to not do these things. Okay? It's okay to use your freedom to not do things like this, because there is something that is more important. In what way are you going to increase the faith of someone else? You're not going to be able to do that when you've got these kinds of disruptions that will cause a disconnect between you and the brethren and a disruption in their faith. These are not the productive ways to accomplish the task. All right? And so we are free to not do these things. In the end, it will not matter what people eat. Okay? It just is not going to matter. But what will really matter is, do they love God and do they know him? All right? That's what's really going to matter. Are they being loved by God and do they know him? If they are being loved by God, then they will love God. If they know their God and they are being loved by him, then he will know them. Okay, he will know the person who he loves and who he increases. So however that is to be accomplished, that is what our objective is. Do not use your freedom to do anything. And he uses the example of the food offered to idols. Do not use your freedom as a way to cause a disruption in somebody else's life. Okay, now you have people in your life who have weak faith. If you don't, then get out there and get some people in your life who have weaker faith than you. All right, this is a good thing. It is a good thing to have people in your life who do not believe in forgiveness like you believe in forgiveness. It's a good thing to have people in your life who live by the law. If you are not present within their lives, then who is going to encourage them to move in a different direction, to realize that they do have the forgiveness of God? You just have to find the right way and be sensitive, of course, to the Holy Spirit, who will likely reveal to you the right way to share with that individual person what they need to know in order to move them in the direction of realizing that they are forgiven. But you got to have these people in your life to be a participant in the work of God, to move people from having weak faith to strong faith, right? Look, I understand that it can be hard. I understand it can be hard and painful. So that doesn't mean you have to do it constantly, 24 hours a day. Just doing it once a week, or maybe every other week or something, or maybe once a month. You could probably tolerate that just fine in order to have access and perhaps be available for the Lord to use at those moments as they come. Through your interactions with someone, you may share something as the Lord speaks through your mouth to this person so that they may hear from him the truth that will move them in the direction of the freedom that he has called us to. So this is the question that will facilitate some conversation for those of you who are using this for small groups. The question is, describe some of your relationships with those who have weak faith. So you have relationships with people who have weak faith. Describe them. Tell us about them. Tell us about these relationships. What it is that you like about them. What it is you don't like about them. Some of the ways that you have tried to relate these things, the truth of forgiveness and freedom from the law. Obviously, you're not likely talking with them about food being offered to idols, but other things. What are these conversations about? How have these conversations been useful and effective? How have they not been useful or effective? And tell us about some of these conversations that you have and the people who you have access to, and whether or not you think that there still can be opportunities, or whether it appears that it's unlikely there will be any opportunities. And through that, understand that if there are not likely going to be any useful opportunities, then feel free to move on to the next person or the next place, even with a whole bunch of new people. But do you have relationships with other people, and are you finding ways to continue the conversations in a way that is at least providing you with opportunities to move them in a direction of increasing their faith? All right, and I'll continue into chapter 9 in the next message. Thanks.